Hello, everyone, and welcome to Africa Fire Mission's weekly virtual training session. My name is Mike. I'm a project coordinator here with Africa Fire Mission, and I'm so happy that all of you took time out of your busy schedules and are using your bundles to join us here today live for our training. Today is going to be the first of a series of topics looking at motor vehicle accidents. We're going to go from getting there to on the scene to what you do once you're there, extrication, the whole thing. So join us for this series over the next few weeks. If you stay with us for at least 70% of the class today, you'll be getting a certificate of attendance, and that's usually about 45 minutes. You'll get that certificate of attendance. Afterwards, we're going to have a tea time where we can discuss more about today's topic or anything else that's on your mind. Before we get started with our class today, I'm going to pass it over to Jose. Jose is Africa Fire Mission's fire safety advocate, and he gets out in the community, does a great job. You're going to see he's out in the community today. So I'm going to pass it over to Jose for our word of encouragement.
Thank you so much, Mike. I truly appreciate you every Wednesday being available and also just helping us to have these Wednesday sessions up and running. I just wanted to have a word of encouragement. Today I'm outdoor, as you can see. Yes, I'm actually in a fire assembly point, and I'm actually at Buruburu Girls. Buruburu Girls has invited us, a consortium of partners in Kenya, that is Red Cross, Kenya Power, and what do we call them? Us guys as Africa Fire Mission, just to come and talk to the school about school safety and also what to do in regards to when there's a fire. So my encouragement to you is that you as the fire safety advocate, you as the firefighter, don't wait for fire to come so that you say that you're a firefighter. No, it is better to do the prevention than actually the cure. So I would encourage you, just walk in your local school and ask for permission for you to actually do a fire sensitization. For us here, we're just going to do about 45 minutes. And of course, we're going to show them where the fire assembly point is. Not so many people know where the assembly point is, like that, what is behind me, or what is this for. Also, we're going to talk to them about how to use a fire extinguisher. These are basics, you know. And these basics, you know the basics, but they don't know the basics. You know, so it's up to you to reach out to your school. And this is the right time because exams are about to start, and you know the culture in Kenya. When exams are about to start, issues start raising. So I'd encourage you as a firefighter, don't wait for the letters. We don't have a letter, but we just walked in and said, hey, I'm a fireman, you know, and I can talk to your school and it is free of charge, you know. So stay encouraged, and this is your time. Tomorrow, we're in another school, Muthaiga Primary, and we're not stopping until November during the symposium. You're going to see how many schools that we've reached out to. So stay encouraged, stay blessed, and stay tuned until the end of the session. God bless you. And back to you, Mike.
Thank you very much, Jose. That's awesome to see you out there working in the community. You set such a great example for everyone. We really appreciate you, Jose. We're going to jump right in. Today's instructor is going to be me. I'm going to be taking us through emergency vehicle operations. Let me get my my screen shared here. And there we go. If you have any questions as we're working our way through this training session, please put your questions into the chat and we'll open it up when we get through. I'm going to move through this a little bit quickly because there's a lot of material that I'd like to get covered here, and I'll encourage you to visit our YouTube page. Go to YouTube and search for Africa Fire Mission, and you'll find a video of this that you can watch. You can pause it and take a little bit more time to look at some of these slides as we go through here. This program is presented by VFIS. It's an insurance company here in the United States that provides insurance services for fire companies, and it's a great resource. They've got a lot of great training materials. So I've taken their emergency vehicle operator training program and I've sort of trimmed things down a little bit to give a sort of brief overview and get you guys an idea of what we're talking about here. So right off the bat, what is driver training? Why is driver training important? Every response that we have involves a vehicle response. Every call we get, every incident, we've got to get in the trucks, we've got to drive somewhere. So it's a key part of what we do, trying to get to the incident scene. And this statistic here changes annually, and this program is a number of years old, but it's 25% of firefighters are killed responding to or returning from incidents. I don't know what that number would relate to where you all are from, but any percentage of that is too high. And of course, there's consequences. If you're the vehicle operator and you get into an accident, someone gets hurt or someone gets killed, you may be criminally charged, and no one wants to see that. So having a department training program is something you can do that sort of demonstrates that you've got this commitment to safety and that you're prepared to do your best to have safe drivers. One thing that we want to emphasize, sort of a big misconception, if you follow the rules of driving, if you follow the laws that are on the books, you'll be a safe driver. And that's not true. It's a common misconception. You're not going to be able to safely arrive at an incident just because you're following, the laws that govern vehicle response. And we'll talk about some of those things here coming up. So what happens if we've got into a vehicle accident as we're out there responding to an incident? Of course, the obvious ones, personal injury or death to our responders. No one wants to see one of our brothers or sister firefighters get injured or die in that response. Of course, there's injuries to others. It's our responsibility to get out and to help people. So we don't want to be causing injury by getting into an accident or something like that. The next one, the vehicle and equipment loss, and that relates to that long-term impact as well. It's very difficult for you all to get a fire apparatus in the various countries that you're from. Even here in the US, for me to order a new fire apparatus right now, if I were to order a brand new fire apparatus today, I won't see that until about 24 to 26 months from now. That's the lead time. It's over 2 years to produce a new fire truck. And, functioning fire trucks are a valuable commodity in Africa. So getting into an accident, how long is it going to take to get that vehicle repaired, or is it ever even going to be replaced? So it's really something to think about. We can't be getting into accidents. We've got to take care of those vehicles. Other adverse effects that we might experience, if you lose that valued experienced member, how long does it take to get get someone new hired and get them trained and replaced? You can't replace those years of experience that people have. There's criminal prosecutions, there's civil litigations. If you injure someone, their family can take you to court and press you for financial reparations and things like that. The financial cost to both your department and maybe to you personally, if you're held if you hold some civil liability. It's a lot to think about. And then there's that sort of obvious one of, if we get into an accident on the way to an incident, we can't provide those services that we were called for. So we don't want to become a part of the problem. And obviously there's that poor public image. Anytime a fire truck gets into an accident, certainly there's going to be lots of people crowding around. There's going to be lots of pictures and cell phones and videos. And we don't want to do anything that will tarnish our reputation in the public. I know, especially in Kenya, you all have been working so hard to improve your public image, and certainly this would be a big blow to your public image if you crash the fire truck, right? So sometimes by law we're permitted some privileges when we're responding to an emergency incident. And I want to throw a disclaimer out here that some of these privileges that I'm about to talk about are the way things are here in the United States. And I would refer you to your own vehicle laws. You have a National Traffic Act. You also have some county laws. So please check into those and see how they relate to your individual situation. But here, we do have a privilege that you can proceed through a stop sign or a red traffic signal. But with that privilege that you're extended, you must still use what we call due regard for the welfare of others. So yes, you can drive through that stoplight without stopping, but you need to make sure that you're not going to injure someone when you're doing it, right? We're also permitted to exceed the posted speed limit, but once again, only with due regard to the welfare of others. Another privilege that we're allowed, that we try not to do, we do it in very limited circumstances, is to travel against the normal flow of traffic. So that may be driving the wrong way down a one-way street, or driving the wrong way, on a two-way highway or divided highway. But once again, while you are extended that privilege, you need to make sure that you're doing it safely and that you're not causing harm or endangering the welfare of someone else while you're doing that. There's lots of various legal principles and terms when it relates to driving an emergency vehicle in a response. Just a few things to consider, though, is that even though you're working and you're driving that fire truck and you have the lights on, you have the siren going, you're still subject to all of the rules of the road, unless there's a very specific exemption provided in the law. So be certain that you're not violating any of those common traffic rules. I know in Kenya, in order for you to get your driver's license, everyone has to attend a traffic school. So those rules, those things that you learned when you went through traffic school to obtain your license, those all apply even when you're operating the emergency vehicle. If you are granted some of those exemptions, the ability to drive through a stop sign, the ability to drive through a red traffic light, you need to understand that's only during an emergency operation. It's not, you cannot do that when you're returning from the incident. And once again, I'm sure I'll touch on it later on, those lights and sirens, we only use that when we're on our way to the incident. It is not appropriate to use our lights on our way back to the fire station. Okay. And then, the other thing to consider, I've mentioned it before, I'll mention it many times throughout this. As an emergency vehicle driver, you could be found guilty of a crime if you violate the traffic laws and cause harm or injury to someone else. Okay. Couple of legal terms, and the way these apply may be a little bit different in your country, but certainly the term liability, right? Liability means who's responsible, whose fault is it if something happens. And of course, if you violate the traffic laws, you get into an accident, that liability falls on you individually as the driver. Due regard is a term I used a little bit previously. Due regard just means that you're doing the right thing, that you're paying attention, and that you are taking care of the welfare of others, considering the welfare of others, and you're doing what's appropriate to not place someone in harm's way. Negligence and gross negligence. Negligence is willfully doing something that could cause harm to another, or doing something that is so wrong that everyone should know that it's wrong. So if you decide that you're going to drive the wrong way down a one-way street and exceed the speed limit and not stop at a stop sign at the end of that street, and you crash into someone else and kill them, that was negligent behavior. Clearly negligent behavior, that you were doing all of those things in combination, maybe even to the level of gross negligence. Okay. And then there's that vicarious liability. And vicarious liability also means that maybe you weren't the individual strictly responsible for the incident, but maybe you were the ranking officer in the vehicle. So you weren't driving, but you were the highest ranking officer in there that's responsibility should be for directing the driver in driving safely or giving them orders. So you may also be held liable in that position as well. So just some things to keep in mind. As I mentioned before, of course, this says state laws or administrative regulations. That would read county for you. But I know there is a National Traffic Act in Kenya that regulates your traffic rules. And I assume the same for some of the other various countries in Africa that we have joining us today. I know I saw Malawi, Zambia, So we get lots of good representation. Okay, so you've got national laws. Your local municipal government may have laws. There may be local ordinances or statutes. And then you also are required to abide by whatever your organization's rules are. And maybe you have some, maybe you don't. As your departments begin to develop and progress further along, you'll want to develop your own standards, your own standard operating procedures for operating the emergency vehicle during a response. Here in the United States, there's an organization called the NFPA. The NFPA has a bunch of what we consider to be nationally recognized standards that cover everything that we do as firefighters. And it's not perfect, but I would encourage you all to check out the NFPA standards. You can find them online. Typically, you don't need a subscription to read what the standard is. I don't think that it would be appropriate in Africa to adopt these NFPA standards as they're written, but it's a great framework for you to look at what some standards are in other places in the world as you're trying to build your own standards. And of course, for most of you in Africa, a more appropriate source may be some British standards. That sometimes the British way of doing things in the fire department sometimes is a little bit more compatible with the way we see you all operate in Africa. Just a couple things that are mentioned here in the NFPA recommendations are some times when you must come to a complete stop when you're operating that fire apparatus. And it's, any stop signal, stop sign, traffic lights. Anytime a traffic officer, a police officer directs you to stop, you're required to stop. You should also be coming to a complete stop at a blind intersection. What's a blind intersection? It's an intersection where you can't see far enough in either direction to see whether you've got rapidly approaching traffic from a different direction. Anytime we approach an intersection where we can't see all of the lanes of traffic, we've got to bring that fire apparatus or that ambulance to a complete stop. And also a stopped bus. And culturally, this might be a little bit different. Here, we're sort of referencing school buses. In the United States, a school bus is always bright yellow for students to be taken to and from school. I know you guys have all sorts of different buses and sort of public and private transportation there. So that one may not completely apply to you, but we were talking about school buses in this particular standard. The other standard here that talks about traffic, again, some of the same things. You've got to stop if a law enforcement officer directs you to, stop signs, traffic lights. If you do not have the right of way, if by the regular rules of traffic, if you don't have the right of way, you've got to come to a stop. Blind intersections, pretty obvious things here. Okay, if there's a hazards in an intersection, certainly be sure we come to a complete stop before we proceed safely through an intersection. There's all sorts of various different types of emergency vehicles. We all know our fire trucks that we have come in various shapes and sizes. And each one of those sort of has different characteristics when we operate them. So we have to take in the considerations of the individual vehicles as we respond, and maybe the way we drive those vehicles based on their weight, their length, their height. That dictates how aggressively you're able to drive that vehicle. As you're operating it, there's various forces that are acting on that vehicle, and different things that you can do that may cause you to lose control of the vehicle as you're operating it. Some of these may be obvious, but we'll quickly touch on them. Driving too fast, right? Obviously, if we're driving too fast, makes things very easy to lose control. Accelerating too quickly. There's a tendency to really stomp on that accelerator pedal, and we're excited and trying to get to the incident as quickly as we can. But we want a nice smooth acceleration. We don't want to try to accelerate too quickly. Those forces of physics acting on our vehicle can cause us issues. Traction control, what's the condition of the tires? If the tires are in poor condition, we may easily lose traction. What's the condition of the road? Is there heavy rain that may cause it to be slippery? Is there loose stones or gravel? When we try to bring the vehicle to a stop, braking too hard, and that's typically related to driving too fast or accelerating too quickly. Applying the brakes very hard, we'll talk about what forces that applies to our vehicle and the reaction forces and what happens there. A brake fade is a condition where you're using the brakes too much. And if you use the brakes too much, sometimes you can heat up the components of the brake system and heat up the hydraulic fluid that controls your brakes and cause the brakes to fade where they lose their effectiveness and their stopping power. And then, of course, anytime we're changing directions or traveling through a curve, we've got various forces acting on the vehicle as well that can cause us to lose control. What are those forces? We talked about friction there just a little bit, right? Friction is that contact between the driving surface and your tire, and we need that friction. The friction is that force that holds the tires to the road and keeps us going down the road. Velocity is another term for speed, but the velocity plays into the next two terms of momentum and inertia. And there, if we talk about physics, we may have learned back when we were in school, an object in motion tends to stay in motion, and an object at rest tends to stay at rest. So those forces of momentum and inertia factor in by the weight of the vehicle. The larger and the heavier a vehicle is, the more momentum that it carries, the more inertia it has. So that takes more time for that vehicle to get stopped. We've got to begin to brake earlier when we're using a heavier vehicle. And centrifugal force, that's that force as we make a turn. That's that force that as we make a turn in one direction, it wants to push us away in the other direction, right? So here we are with our friction. The key component to friction is checking the quality of those tires, okay? Tires need to be in good condition so that we can gain that good traction between the road. But then there's also other friction components in there, the brake friction, the condition and quality of the brake pads that are on your vehicle. That you've got friction between the brake pad and the disc if you've got disc brakes, or the brake pad and the rotors, or the drum if you've got drum brakes. Important component there as well. Velocity is simply another way to talk about the speed. Velocity plays in our acceleration when the velocity is increasing, deceleration as velocity is decreasing. Of course, that determines the pitch of the fire truck, and we'll talk about that here in a moment. And of course, velocity is directly related to braking as well, because braking is our component that's going to reduce our velocity and reduce our speed. Momentum, a term I mentioned earlier, measured as the product of the object's mass or weight times velocity. Okay, that's your physics calculation. You take your weight, you multiply it by your speed, and that tells you what your momentum is. And then that's the sort of the force that's going to transfer to anything if you may hit it. Okay, and then inertia, we talked about an object that's moving wants to stay in motion. So that inertia, that's the amount of force that it's going to take to keep you moving along. Centrifugal force caused by a rotating body. The influences of inertia are there, and inertia is what causes centrifugal force, and that centrifugal force is pushing you away from the center of that rotation. And that's why as we go around the curve, if we're making a curve to the left, our fire truck wants to keep going in a straight line, and we've got an illustration of that right here. Okay, so as we're making that turn to the left, you can see the fire truck's going. As we steer that direction, naturally the vehicle wants to continue going the way it was going. Okay, so what problems does that cause for us? If we take that curve too fast, what's going to happen? Our fire truck's going to roll over. Okay. And that's certainly something that we want to avoid. So as these various forces operate on our vehicle, we have some terms for those. Pitch is the way that vehicle tilts when it's sitting, the nose down or the rear or the nose up. So as we accelerate, our pitch is going to rise the front of the vehicle up and the back of the vehicle down. As we decelerate, as we brake, our pitch forces go the opposite direction. So then as we brake, the nose of the fire truck's going to go down, the rear is going to rise. So we need to keep that in mind, how those forces are acting on us as we accelerate and as we brake. Yaw is rotating on the center axis. So this is your side to side rotation. And the forces of yaw, when they interact, is when we're experiencing that centrifugal force. When we're making a sharp corner very fast, those yaw forces are operating on our vehicle. And when we experience yaw, we can spin. We lose friction. We experience too much yaw. We'll get our vehicle spinning in a circle. We'll have a spin out, some may call it. And then roll is one of the most common forces that we see exerted on the fire truck, and the one that we have to be the most cautious of. Here we're looking at the center line going straight through the vehicle in its direction of travel. So now roll is where we're rotating and rolling over. And rollover incidents are where we see our most injuries and our most accidents with our fire apparatus. The reason for that being the different vehicle characteristics, okay? Our fire trucks typically are very heavy, and the weight isn't always distributed evenly throughout it. Our cabs are much lighter than the back, where we're carrying all of our equipment. Carrying a large, heavy volume of water on the fire truck certainly plays in there. The different components of our vehicle system, our suspension system. You know, a suspension system gives you that smooth ride when you're driving a vehicle. But that suspension system also fights against those forces of pitch, where the vehicle wants to nose down or nose up. So while, yes, a functioning suspension system gives us a smoother ride, that's not what's most important to us. It's keeping our fire truck level and making sure that we're not experiencing too much of those pitch, or even some of those roll forces can be counteracted with a functioning, well-adjusted suspension system. Our braking systems, I don't think I need to tell any of you how important it is to make sure that we maintain those braking systems, to make sure that those are safe, so that we can stop that fire apparatus when we want to. A baffling system is, this is talking about the water tank in your fire apparatus that carry water. If you just have an open cylinder, an open container, those forces of momentum and inertia that act on your vehicle are also acting on the water in that tank. So when you come to a stop with the fire truck, the water that's inside your tank wants to keep moving forward, even though the vehicle has stopped. So if there's a baffling system within that water tank, it's a series of dividers within that slows down the movement of that water within the water tank. If your fire truck does not have a baffling system, when you stop that fire truck, you're going to feel it rocking back and forth until that water settles. Okay, so baffling systems are very important. If some of you in your communities are out there exploring the possibility of building your own fire trucks, that's an awesome thing to do. But baffling systems to try to keep that water from moving while you're driving down the road is very important. If you know that you don't have baffles in your water tanks, be very cautious about traveling when your tank is partially full. That's the most dangerous time with an unbaffled water tank, is when it's partially full, because that allows the water to move. When the tank's completely empty, you won't have that movement of water, obviously. And when it's full, there won't be much room for that water to move within the tank. It's when your tank's partially full that those forces without a baffling system cause us the most trouble. Just something to keep a thought about. And then there's that rollover awareness that I'm going to touch on in another slide. Here's a picture. You see this, this is just a big round cylindrical tank, but I can almost assure you with certainty that inside that big tank, then, like I said, we've got some dividers in there that will keep that water from sloshing around and from throwing the vehicle around. And that water can even work without a baffling system. As we're going around a curve, the centrifugal force pushing that water out to the side can cause our apparatus to roll over if there's not a baffling system in there. Okay, so baffling system, very important to have within our water tanks. What can we do to be more aware of rollover situations? The first thing is to think about where's the center of gravity in the vehicle, and the stability of the vehicle will be better the lower that center of gravity is. So where is the most mass? Where's the center of the largest portion of mass in that fire truck? And typically, the more water capacity that a fire truck can carry, the higher its center of gravity is. The higher the center of gravity, the more likely it is for the fire truck to roll over. Okay. And of course, seat belts are vitally important. If your fire trucks don't have seat belts in them, find some seat belts, find a way to install those seat belts. Seat belts save lives in the rollover accidents. I can't stress enough. We should be using seat belts all the time, every response, anytime we're in a vehicle, whether it's a fire apparatus or a personal vehicle. Seat belts save lives. Here's a calculation if we wanted to look at sort of the science of rollovers. And essentially what this is showing us is, based on the center of the water tank, the middle of the water tank, measure that distance down to the floor, measure the distance from the rear wheels to the center of the driver's side rear tire, right? There's your center of the vehicle, find your center of gravity, and the higher that center of gravity is, there's a little bit of a calculation, and this gives you sort of a number to work off of, right? Based on the height of your apparatus, and gives you your static stability force, right? So a little bit of a technical term there, but the real takeaway that I want you to take away from this is let's think about where the center of gravity is. If we've got a lot of water on that apparatus, we know that fire truck may roll over easier. So we've got to take it easy when we're driving through curves, when we're going around turns and things like that. Watch our speed, watch our braking, all of those factors. I mentioned the seatbelts, critically important. Accidents like these that are shown here, seatbelts will save the lives of these folks that are operating these vehicles. And it says wear your seatbelts and slow down. It's natural that we want to get to the incident as fast as we can. To do our jobs. It's great. We've got that excitement and we've got that enthusiasm, but we also have to remember that, we didn't cause these incidents. We don't want to become part of the problem. We want to be part of the solution, right? So let's temper our response so that we're not driving too quickly. Defensive driving is something that we should be thinking about. That should be our mentality. When we're operating that fire truck, we should have sort of in the back of our mind thinking that everyone out here is trying to crash into my fire truck and no one's paying attention driving. So it's all on me as the driver to make sure that my fire truck and my crew arrive safely on the scene. Okay. So we're always looking out for those unexpected situations. We're always looking for someone to pull out in front of us. We're expecting someone's not going to stop at a stop sign. Someone's not going to stop at a traffic light. Someone's not going to yield the right of way to us. And we need to understand that it's our responsibility when we get behind the wheel to get our crew there safely. So we go through trainings like these. We develop our own policies and procedures so that we don't face any of these unnecessary legal consequences. It's easy to assume that when you're driving that fire truck, and you've got your lights going and you've got your siren going, that someone's going to give the right of way to you. But something that's very important to remember, you can't force it, you can't assume it, and you don't have it. There's nothing that you can do while you're operating that vehicle to force the vehicle in front of you to get out of the way. And you know, that plays into even the personality traits of your vehicle operators. A vehicle operator shouldn't be someone that gets easily agitated, that gets angry quickly. We want somebody that can stay cool, calm, and collected at all the time. There's nothing you can do operating that vehicle for those people to get out of your way. Don't try to force your way in. Don't assume that someone's gonna give you the right of way. Just because those lights are on, that siren's going, does not mean that you're gonna have that right of way. As we're approaching intersections and things like that, you know, some trainings, they tell you to try to make eye contact with the other driver of a vehicle. For me, the thing that I find the most valuable is when I'm approaching an intersection and you know, I'm trying to determine whether that vehicle across the intersection is going to pull out in front of me or not, is I look at their wheels. I look at the front wheels, right? Because as soon as they begin to move, that front wheel is going to turn. If I look at the driver, you know, I can't tell what's going to happen just by looking at the driver, whether they're going to pull out. But if I'm watching the wheels on that vehicle, I'm going to know the instant they start to move, and I'm going to be prepared to avoid them, to apply the brakes, to yield, to get out of their way if I need to, you know, if they do something foolish. Some habits to have while we're operating that, while we're driving down the road. Aim high in our steering, get the big picture. As we're steering, we want to be looking, you know, where we're going. We don't want to be focused directly on the road in front of us, but as you're navigating a turn, you want to be looking wide out ahead of you, and looking at that big picture as we're making that turn. If we're focused right in the very close, just in front of the vehicle, you know, as we're trying to turn that steering wheel, make that turn, sometimes we don't see that big picture. Sometimes we overcompensate. So we always want to keep that big picture. Look where we're going, not where we're at. Get the big picture. Keep your eyes moving, scanning all the time. We don't want to get into that tunnel vision where we're just staring straight ahead. And especially as we start to get closer to the scene and you see that big column of smoke, or you see that fire, okay, as the operator, we're not looking at that so much as we're still focusing, we're scanning, we're looking around, seeing what those other drivers are doing. Doing whatever we can to make sure that other drivers see us, using our emergency lights, using our siren, driving with our headlights on, all the lights that we can have, making our vehicles as visible as we can. That last one is identify that escape route. And especially when you're operating, trying to get through traffic in a busy highway, you know, if someone puts the brakes on in front of me, if someone tries to stop quickly in front of me, where can I go? Where's my way out? Do I go to the right? Do I go to the left? How can I avoid that rear end collision or strike in another vehicle? So always keep some sort of escape route in mind. Couple things to think about when we're using those lights and sirens. Okay, those lights and sirens tell the other drivers, tell the public that we're in an emergency mode, we're on our way to an emergency. Something that I see all the time when I'm in Africa is I see operators driving the apparatus with their lights on when they're going somewhere other than an emergency call. And if there's one habit that we need to break, that's something that we need to stop. It damages our reputation to the public. And if we expect the public to yield the right of way to us when we're responding to an emergency, if they see us driving around with the lights on as we're going to get water for the fire truck, we're going back to the fire station, you know, we're doing anything other than responding to an emergency, and we're doing that with our lights on or using our siren just because we're in a hurry to get back to the fire station, that we lose respect. And we can't expect the public to get out of our way if we're abusing that privilege of those lights and sirens. The other point that we're making here is that using those lights and sirens, all that's doing is requesting to the other drivers that they yield the right of way to us. It's not forcing them to do it. It's their choice. Okay, so it's a request. Think of it as a request that we're asking you to get out of our way. Okay, we can't compel them to do it. So as we're operating, of course, we want to make sure that we're using both the siren and the lights in combination, using the horn on the fire truck as well. There's some ways, though, that you use that. We don't want to turn that siren on and just leave it on all the time. With the lights, this slide may not be necessarily appropriate for you all, but generally speaking, red is for emergency vehicles like fire and EMS. Law enforcement, it typically uses the blue color, and an amber or a yellow color may be for construction equipment, and just sort of a danger or caution. And be very cautious about clear lights. Anytime clear or a white light, when we get on the scene, we want to turn those off. We want to shut the headlights off once we arrive on the scene if we don't need them to light up the area, because it's very distracting to other drivers. Okay, and these colors may be a little different for you all. They're even different in different states here in the U.S. This graphic here that we're looking at, the essential thing, the point that we want to get across to you is that you can outdrive your siren. Okay, light travels the fastest, right? The speed of light is very fast. We know that the speed of sound is slower than the speed of light, and certainly none of our fire trucks can drive faster than the speed of sound, right? So we can't actually drive faster so that we outrun our siren, but in effect we can. And what this is showing is that if you're operating at 65 kilometers per hour, okay, that siren can effectively be heard and recognized, and a person can react to it from a distance of about 100 meters. But as we increase our speed, that disappears to the point where if we're operating that siren and we're traveling 100 kilometers per hour, that distance is only about 4 meters in front of you, that folks can hear that siren and recognize it and know what's going on with it. So when we're operating, for me personally, in my department, we operate on a major highway, and the second longest highway in the United States runs right through my primary response area. And when we're on that interstate highway and we're traveling down the highway, the siren doesn't really work. You can get behind a vehicle and they don't know you're there. They can't hear it. Because we're traveling so fast, we're almost what we call outrunning the siren. So just keep that in mind, that people aren't going to hear you from nearly as far away when you're traveling fast. When you're using the siren, of course, we're going to use them only when we're responding to an emergency. The least effective studies, and maybe this doesn't apply to you in Africa, but studies here in the United States show that, and maybe it's a cultural thing, but the high-low siren sound, it just goes, from a high tone to a low tone, bee-boo, bee-boo, that sound, we typically hear that. I know that's popular with the British. Here in the United States, studies have shown that's the least effective warning device. It's one that we rarely use here, so that may play into it. The big point that I'm trying to make here is that we want to change that tone. So typically, while you're traveling and you're not near intersections, you're using what we would call a wail, where the siren winds up high and for a long and then back down, and high and back down. Then we change it to what we call a yelp motor, where the siren tone changes very rapidly. As we approach intersections, we want to change that siren tone, because the drivers out there, if you're using that same siren tone the whole time, people begin to ignore it or forget about it. So as we approach intersections, we want to change the tone, switch the siren sounds to a different sound as we approach intersections. And use something else. If people aren't paying attention to the siren, there's where you might want to get on the horn or try to use some other sort of audible device. I've seen in some countries where you're using the public address system, you're using the speaker and you're giving verbal commands. That's awesome. That's something we don't we don't do here. But that's great. Where you're just actually telling people what you want them to do. Very cool. Space management is something that we always want to talk about, and we want to keep this cushion of safety around our emergency vehicle. So as we're operating that emergency vehicle, we want to keep a buffer zone around us. We want to keep a bubble around us with no other vehicles in it. So as we're operating, we want to try to maneuver our vehicle so that we've got some space around us, so we're not bumping into anybody else, right? Following distance. We use this 4-second rule. If you're traveling, 65 kilometers per hour or less, we want to keep 4 seconds of space between us. Well, what do I mean by that? So as you're driving down the road, pick out an object along the road. Maybe it's a tree or a bush or something like that. As the vehicle in front of you passes that object, you should be able to count 4 seconds before you arrive at that object. That's a safe buffer zone that you want to try to maintain between you and the vehicle in front of you. When we exceed 65 kilometers per hour, we want that bubble to be a little bit bigger, maybe 5 seconds. Why do we want to keep that amount of distance between us? Because that's our braking space. That's the amount of time that we need to get our vehicle stopped. And of course, that space management, that rate of closure, right? That rate of closure, if you're driving faster than the vehicle in front of you, and then the vehicle in front of you quickly applies the brakes, that rate of closure, whereas we're approaching that next vehicle, increases rapidly, right? Space management. What about our blind spots? In our mirrors, in our side mirrors, do we have side mirrors? Those are good targets for our angry public. Unfortunately, sometimes, you get out there in a situation, the public's mad at you, right? Maybe those mirrors are one of the first things to go, but those mirrors are critically important to being able to see all around us. Are there any spots that we can't see in the mirrors? Can we add a mirror so that we can see those? Make sure there's nobody sneaking up into that blind spot. You guys have lots of motorcycles, right? It's a common form of transport, certainly much more common than here. And those motorcycles love to squeeze in between everybody's vehicles, right? They're cutting between lanes. They're getting in there, tucking into our blind spots. And then just a couple other things maybe you're not always thinking about in that space management. You're worried about the other vehicles around you, but what about things above you or below you? Are we aware of how tall the fire apparatus is so that we're not catching anything low hanging? And ground clearance, the roads, the condition of some of the roads that you guys have to operate on. It's amazing. Sometimes you can even get a fire truck down some of these roads, right? What's the ground clearance that we have so that we're not getting our fire truck hung up on something? Be cautious about bridges. Make sure that bridge can handle the weight of your fire truck, things like that. Be cautious about that traffic moving behind you too. As you're applying, as you're braking, as you're coming to a stop, if you try to stop rapidly, the folks behind you may not be expecting that, right? And could cause a rear end collision. Rates of closure here, again, it touches on that vehicle speed outrunning the effectiveness of the siren. And it sounds like I see in the chat there, somebody's, we hit a good point for somebody in the driving the ambulances, so that's awesome, right? But remember that other people they may not be able to see behind them. Maybe their vehicle doesn't have mirrors where they can see. Sometimes even when you're not on duty and you hear a siren, can you always tell what direction it's coming from? As the siren echoes off of buildings or things, sometimes you're not quite sure where it's coming from. So people may misinterpret where it's coming from. They may think the siren's coming from behind them when actually, it's coming off to one side. You've got hearing impaired drivers, certainly distracted drivers. It's a big problem here in the US. I'm sure it is there as well. The people use their cell phones, while they're driving. I'm sure it happens there as well. Loud music, phones, kids, stress, road rage. Some of your matatus got tons of people hanging off of them everywhere. The driver can't see. It can be pretty chaotic, right? And then, of course, you've got those aggressive drivers out there that think where they're going is more important than where you're going, right? Everybody in today's world is sort of me focused, right? So they don't want to get out of the way where their heading's a little bit more important than your emergency, right? So just keep thinking about those things we touched on with that space management, places that you can't see on the fire truck, overhead obstructions, obstructions on the ground, all those sort of items. I don't want to beat that to death, right? Speed management, whatever that posted speed limit is, there's not a whole lot of reason to be going much faster than that. Be very cautious. Emergency vehicles become dangerous objects as the faster they get, the more dangerous they become. It takes longer for them to stop. They're so heavy. If you're driving a fully loaded fire truck, full load of water, you're weighing you're very heavy. If you hit a small little motorcycle, what are you going to do to someone on a motorcycle? Fire truck versus motorcycle, okay? The outcome of that is going to be horrific, right? So please watch your speed. You'll get there when you get there, and then I don't know, I haven't really seen many of these here. The second point where it says you shouldn't exceed cautionary speeds. So here in the US, our speed limit signs are white with black lettering, but then sometimes along the roads, when there's a sharp turn coming up or something, there'll be a smaller sign that's yellow with black lettering and a different speed. And that's what we would call a cautionary speed. So while the road's speed limit may be, 40 kilometers per hour, it may say, you may have this yellow sign that says 20 kilometers per hour. Those are really important. If your traffic laws incorporate those are typically there for your larger commercial vehicles, and it's an indication if there's a cautionary speed that there's a good possibility of a rollover. A turn is sharp enough to cause a rollover, and that's why they're telling you to let the big trucks know, slow down. And your fire truck, even your ambulance, it's a big truck, right? They're going to try to roll over. When you're steering, let's use both hands on the wheel. 3 and 9 positions. We want to. We're not hanging our arm out the window. Looking like we're out for a cool drive. One hand on the wheel. We're not doing that. 2 hands on the wheel. 3 and 9 position. Always scanning. Backing up. There's a lot of different things that you can do to make sure that you're backing up safely. But if you're going to take one thing away from today's training about backing up, I would ask that please, fire trucks do not go in reverse without someone standing behind and watching. There's no reason at all that we should be moving our fire truck in reverse, that we should be backing up without a spotter. It's as simple as that. If you look at this particular slide, it talks, park intelligently. So try to position your apparatus so that it never has to go in reverse. As you're positioning it on the scene, we'd try not to go in reverse. You should have a backup alarm on your fire truck. I don't know if that's very common where you guys are at, but it's a great feature to have on there. But that use a spotter, using hand signals, watching your mirrors. All of your problems backing up will be solved with a spotter. One spotter, one person communicating in sight with the driver. It's so embarrassing when a fire truck backs up and hits something or damages something. It makes us look foolish to the public. It damages our equipment. There is absolutely no excuse for backing into something with a fire apparatus. None. There should always be someone back there watching. No excuse. I'm not going to beat that to death, but it's a pet peeve of mine, right? And why do we need that spotter? Look, if a car, a small car parks right behind your fire truck, can you see it? I mean, they disappear, right? A small vehicle can disappear right behind that. Or, what if you left something sitting on the tailboard or a piece of equipment out? We don't want to back over anything. Once again, that's solved by a spotter that gets out, walks around the vehicle before it moves, and you've got a spotter back there for safety. Basic maneuvers, when you're changing lanes and things like that, be sure you're planning ahead, using your turn signals so that people know where you're going. Keep in mind that space management, and don't make aggressive lane changes. Make them smoothly. No quick turns, smoothly. Use your signal, move over. Always let people go. And listen, if your turn signals aren't working right, then use your hand signals. I know that most of you, probably all of you, had to go through driving school to get your driver's license, right? You've learned some of these things, these hand signals. Okay, signal before turning, one lane at a time. If you're in a multi-lane road, we're not going to cross multiple lanes of traffic all at once. Move over one lane, recheck, move over another lane, recheck, move over another lane. I'm going to pick up speed here. I'm getting up against our time limit here. When you're passing in traffic, be very cautious as you're passing. Check the traffic ahead of you, check the traffic behind you. Check and double check those blind spots, looking in your mirrors, signaling, okay? Accelerate as you change lanes. Before you cut back in front of someone, use your signal again to indicate to them that you're going to be cutting back in front of them. Checking things, make sure that you turn that turn signal or that directional arrow back off, okay? Basic maneuvers there. Intersections, I talked about this a little bit before, right? We're scanning for hazards. We're slowing as we approach every intersection. We're slowing every intersection as we get to it. We're changing the sounds on the siren. We're checking our various options. We're coming to a complete stop before proceeding. The establish eye contact, once again, personally, I'm not a fan of that. Instead of me making eye contact with the other driver, I'm looking at their wheels. Are their wheels moving? If they're not, I know it's safe for me to go. One lane at a time. Covered all of that. Account for one lane of traffic at a time. And then even as you're passing or maneuvering, think of each lane, changing each lane of traffic as its own little intersection, and use all of those techniques that we talked about as we approach the intersection whenever we're even changing lanes. Adverse conditions, be careful when you've got adverse conditions. We've got this picture of snow. If you're driving your fire truck on the top of Mount Kenya, you might be in the snow. Not something many of you need to worry about, just a few places where you get snow, but certainly you guys get lots of rain, or I wish you guys were getting lots of rain. Kenya, I wish you were getting the rain that you need right now. I know you're facing some drought. But rain causes us to lose friction on the roadways, causes us to lose traction. Leaves or vegetative material out on the roads, loose gravel and stone. You guys have all sorts of adverse conditions that you have to drive through, way more than I will ever have to drive through here, right? So yeah, I think you guys are probably pretty good operating under those. And certainly be careful, nighttime driving, everything gets complicated at nighttime. In some ways it's better because you can see the lights of the approaching vehicles coming. But then there's all those cautions of people not operating their vehicles with lights and things like that. Keep the lights inside the cab dimmed when you're driving at night. If you have bright lights inside the cab, of course, that hurts your night vision. We should be responding a little bit slower at nighttime. Keep the headlights clean, keep the windshield clean. A dirty windshield at nighttime, causes the light to reflect and refract. It makes it more difficult to see. Still keep those eyes moving, keep scanning, keep watching, okay? And then a couple of other adverse handling implications. High winds in certain places. Understand how winds play in with different topographic features, things like that. Sometimes you've got some shear winds coming as you're driving through the landscape, right? Or just certain times of year that bring those high winds. High winds can push your tall fire trucks over. They can help to contribute to a rollover. And then other adverse condition you may experience, if your driver is having some problems in their personal life and they're frustrated and they've got things going on, that can be an adverse condition as well to operating that vehicle. So check in, keep your operators in mind, make sure they're in a good, mental place, because that can really impact how they drive as well. Okay. As the driver, a couple things to do, right? Prepare, get your driver training, be sure you're up to date. I know Kenya's made some changes to their classes of driver's license recently. Is your driver, do you have the appropriate license to operate that vehicle? You should check in that, okay? There's some easy options that you can do that. Make sure that your headlights are functioning, your high beams, your low beams. Pay attention, watch for traffic, make sure your mirrors are properly adjusted. Practice all those different things we talked about space management, speed management, all of those things. Do what you can to avoid collisions. And we're winding down to the end here, sort of reviewing some of these things. Always identify an escape route. Where can I go if things start to go bad? How can I get out of the way? We're braking smoothly and firmly. We're not jamming on those brakes. A smooth application of the brakes, smoothly stopping, accelerating smoothly. And that last one, steer to avoid a head-on impact. If it comes to the point where we're gonna get a collision, do whatever you can to make sure that those vehicles come in contact at an oblique angle, that you get a glancing blow. Do anything you can to avoid that direct head-on impact if you're in that worst case scenario. Placement of vehicles once we get to the emergency incident, that's what I'm going to spend all of next week talking about. I encourage you to join us next week for that. I'm not going to hit on that too terribly much here. Just be cautious. Know that your lights can blind approaching drivers, so be cautious as to where your points are directed. Identify what hazards are there at the scene. If you've got a way to warn people before they approach the scene, that would be fantastic. We'll talk about that next week. And use some sort of traffic control measures. I know you guys don't have a ton of traffic cones, but what kind of things can you improvise to direct traffic where you want them once you get there? Okay. And once again, we're going to cover this in depth next week, but just a quick idea of creating this sort of space safe to operate once we arrive on the scene. That's part of your responsibilities as a driver. Okay. We've wound down to the end, and I don't know if there's any questions or if I covered everything perfectly for you all, but I'm going to wrap things up here, and I thank you all for taking the time out of your day to come and join us. We're going to close out our session for today. Please stick around for our tea time. I'm going to open things up to questions and a little bit more discussion. And a quick reminder, you can find this presentation. It'll be posted on YouTube later today or tomorrow. And during tea time here, I'll post how you can access this class through our classroom as well. You can pass this along to the other drivers and operators, and they can get credit. Thank you all once again for joining us today, and I hope to see you again next week.